which you can all get on 4 on demand. Channel 4 documentary, a Muslim filmmaker got access to the British courts. I want to just read you a woman called Nasim, who was sent here 5 years ago from Pakistan. Her family had forbade her from learning English, and she was being violently abused. And she said, "I thought when I came here my husband would be kind. Do I not have a heart? He tells me he can hit me. He says in Islam because I'm a woman he can hit me." And she went to this court. She did not know that this was not a legally binding court. Most of the women who go to this court do not speak English, and the court told her to stay with her husband. Now, we can talk in a kind of theoretical way as if these Sharia courts were an episode of Judge Judy, you know, that American show where people go along with their problems and they agree that Judge Judy will decide whether they should, you know, split up with their boyfriend or whatever. The reality is not like that. Of course, if individuals, you know, I would very happily, if I had a problem with my boyfriend, let Richard Dawkins adjudicate, set him up as the judge, and that would be an entirely voluntary thing. And of course, if people genuinely want to in a voluntary way, we could have a hypothetical conversation about that. That's not the reality of these Sharia courts. It's simply not. These women are in a situation where they are not making free choices. Can I just respond to one other question, though, about the question about can Islam ever be made compatible with modernity? I think it can, but the only way it can be is if it's challenged and questioned and probed in the same way that Christianity and Judaism. Now, look, I'm allergic to all forms of religion. But the more it is questioned, the more they go, literalist religion is not compatible. But the more it's questioned, the more they have to go, well, you know, okay, that bit's a metaphor. And that bit, we don't really quite mean that bit. We don't actually mean the bit about, oh, okay, we'll kill X, Y, and Z. The more you challenge it, the more metaphorical it becomes, the less it worries me. Now, I can have a nice civilized row with my friends who believe in a completely metaphorical God that doesn't actually do anything and never really did anything. Okay, I can live with that form of religion. I still don't agree with it. I still think it's a bit silly. Fair enough. If we can make Islam more like that, the way that a lot of, not enough, but a lot of Christianity has become, fair enough. But it will only happen if we challenge it. It will not happen if we pretend to respect literalism.
There are a couple of points here. I mean, on the issue of modernity, I don't think any religion can become modern. It's because of the push against it and pushing it back into the private sphere that can then make it seem to be modern. And I think you have to take power away from religion in order to make it seem, modern, seem more palatable, seem more cuddly. And I think unless we take power from political Islam, we won't be able to see all these wonderful things we hear about Islamic feminism, Islamic democracy, Islamic human rights. This cannot happen when religion is in power, when it has power. And I think that's why the battle against political Islam is so crucial. I mean, earlier this morning I said, I sincerely believe that the Sharia courts are very much an extension of the Islamic states. They're very much an extension of the brutalities of Islamic life and laws that we've been talking about today and that we all know very well, because we're talking about things that we hear about and see every day. And in that sense, I think it's, when you're talking about Islam with political power, it makes it a very different phenomenon. About Sharia courts, though, I think we really need to think about what we're going to do about them. One, are they voluntary? Well, of course not. If you just look at, they've got 7,000 cases, for example, the Sharia Law Council. As Johann said, a lot of the women who go to them really don't know about the other options, don't have access to the other options. And in fact, the women who are accessing Sharia courts are the women who need a secular court more than anybody else. So the evidence is there because they believe so strongly in their Sharia court that they say the most vile things. We have so much evidence against them. I think we should take them to court. The European courts have already said it's incompatible. I think humanists and secularists should take the Sharia Council to court. I think we can win. And I'm actually suggesting it to all our colleagues on these panels. They represent huge organizations with great influence. I'm suggesting let's get a group of lawyers together. Just look at some of the evidence on their websites. Don't worry about undercover reporting. This is stuff that they publicize on their website. You know, they've dealt with inheritance. The judge has given the daughters half of what they've given the sons, and that's actually in favor. It actually is favorable for women. Why? Because the men still have to support women, but the women can spend it on anything they want themselves. They don't have to share the money. This is the logic. On domestic violence, the judges have ordered the husbands to take anger management classes and mentoring from community elders. Outrageous. We would never accept that in domestic violence cases in this country. Never. And all of these women have subsequently withdrawn their complaints that they had lodged with the police. An outrage. And you can go on and on. You have cases of child custody. You know, in child custody cases in Britain and in any country with norms that have been fought for, that are pro-children's rights, the child is at the center of the case. It's what's best for the child. You have child custody questions. This is the fatwas they've given on their sites. It's there for everyone. You just type in child custody. Till the age of 7, the mother has the sole right to have custody of the child. If she marries someone who's not related to the child, she loses her right to custody. But, and then he goes on about the son, but if he is above 7, he is in no more need of a woman's care, and he is to be in custody of the father. Well, what if the father is abusive? What if the mother is the best parent for the child? You know, so again, this is the problem. When you put religion first, when you put culture first, and you put human beings last, this is what you get. You get violations of rights, you get discrimination. So what are we going to do? I think we need to gather information. They have a wealth of information because, and you know, they talk about the fact that we're not going to bring criminal aspects of Sharia law. Oh, what are you worried about? We're not going to be stoning people in Trafalgar Square. Well, they are starting to try criminal cases right here in Britain. There are a number of cases, and the reason they can't do more criminal cases, you have the judge from, I have to read you this quote, I'm sorry, because it's so outrageous. They have, oh gosh, I'm never going to find it on my papers. Oh, here. It's the Muslim College in the Midlands is running the UK's first official Sharia court. And Faisal Akhtab Sadiqi, who's a commercial law barrister and head of Hijaz College, and he's sat in judgment on a number of trials, he said, if society becomes more civilized, then those who broke the law should expect to receive the highest degree of punishment. Britain is not civilized enough yet for full extent of Sharia law. And I just want to add another few things. One is the fact that, you know, oftentimes in the PR speak, and I've talked about it earlier this morning, you know, the Islamists here have PR speak, but they say and want the exact same things that the Islamic regime of Iran wants to Al-Qaeda wants. I think we need to be frank and we need not to be mistaken. And I think what happens, whether it's in Iran or in Britain, it's people who suffer, women, men, children who suffer. And we cannot allow it. We can't allow it in Iran. I mean, there's a huge solidarity movement there. We need to support that movement against Islam in power. And sure as hell, we're not going to allow it here. And I think we need to take them to court. We need to gather information about them so that people feel confident to be able to say, we don't want Sharia in this country. We need to say that opposing Sharia is not racism. It is, in fact, racist to demand backward, medieval laws and rules for people who are living in the 21st century. Many of them people who have fled those very rules and come to Britain to live in a secular society. And finally, we're going to say, we're going to do the same to you as we did in Canada. We were very much part of the No Sharia campaign in Canada. They also said they want equality. And by the way, equality is for people, not for religions and for cultures and beliefs. Get it straight. What we said in Canada, we said there's going to be no Sharia law here. Everybody needs to have equal access to a secular law. Everybody is equal before the law. And what happened in Canada, the government was going to implement Islamic courts. They said that they were already Jewish courts, they were already native Indian courts that actually were trying criminal cases. And because of the public outrage, both in Canada and both across the world, they were forced to back down and say no arbitration for anybody, one secular law for all. And that's the only thing we are going to accept in this country and across the world. So they better watch out. We need to be united. We need to work together. And I think we have to use this conference as a stepping stone to push the movement against Sharia further. We have to win, not because it makes us feel good, but because there are lives at stake here, including in Britain, and we have a responsibility and duty to people who live in this country and across the world.
Mahin, I think you wanted to pick up that point.
من دوست دارم بگم که شریعه نباید فراموش کرد. یک پلتفرمه، یک قالب برای اسلام سیاسی که مطالبات خودش رو بخواد.
I would like to say that Sharia is actually a platform. It's a platform for the Islamic political Islam, for the movement of political Islam to get their message, to get their laws across.
من یه تشریح میتونم بکنم. شریعه رو مثل اسب تراوای اسلام سیاسی میدونم که از اون طریق میره مطالبات خودش رو میخواد و به قول معروف سنگای خودش رو میذاره برای اون جامعه‌ای که میخواد.
I'd like to describe Sharia law as a Trojan horse. That's the way they're trying to get their laws and their regulations and their message into the societies like Britain.
حتی زمانی که بالفرض در ایران هم به این صورت دخالت توی سیاست نداشت، از طریق همین شریعه مردم رو میچاپید، پولشون رو بالا میکشید و اون خرافات و به قول معروف سنت‌های عقب افتاده رو به خاطر پیشرفت خودش و به خاطر رفتن تو زندگی مردم رواج میداد.
Even in Iran, even at the time when there was no Islamic government, they used the Sharia law to deliver their message, to reinforce Islamic teaching among people and to get people's money.
ولی الان اسلام سیاسی جنبش قدرتمند وسیع جهانیه و نوپای مربوط به این دهه‌های اخیره.
But now Islam, political Islam, is a global movement and it's very powerful and it's our day's problem.
قسمت‌ها و سازمان‌ها و شاخه‌های مختلفی داره، حتی با هم اختلاف دارن، جنگ‌های خونین هم گاهن میکنن.
They have different factions, different groups, different organizations. They sometimes even fight each other and they have bloody fights among themselves.
اما یه سری پایه‌های فکری و معنوی مشابهی دارن، بیگانه گریزن، ضد زنن، ضد حقوق بچن و معتقد به حقوق جان شمول انسان‌ها نیستن و مخالف مدرنیسمن.
But they have some fundamental shared common beliefs among all of them, and that's they are all misogynists. They're against children, human rights, women's rights, and they're against foreigners.
اون چه که الان اسلام سیاسی اینجا داره میکنه و از طریق شریعه خودش میخواد جلو بره، فقط این نیست که بخواد روش زندگی رو برای یک سری مهاجر و یک سری انسان‌هایی که به هر حال به اسلام معتقدن تعیین کنه، بلکه
the way they're trying to do Sharia is not only just to give a set of rules or some sort of way of life for some people.
بلکه اینه که میخواد اینجا هم قدرت بگیره. یک کشمکشی هست بین این اسلام سیاسی و دولت‌های غربی به طور مثال و گرفتن بیشتر قدرت سیاسی اجتماعی و ضد سکولاریسم بودنش.
But this is a way they're fighting for more and more power. It's a conflict, it's a battlefield between them and the Western societies. They're trying to get as much power as they can. And Sharia is one way of doing it.
من فکر میکنم که اسلام به هیچ وجه رفرم نمیپذیره. اصلا من واقعا گاهن فکر میکنم که چرا زنا به ادیان معتقدن و چرا زنا باید خدا رو ستایش کنن.
I don't think at all in any way, I don't believe that Islam is possible to be radicalized, to be reformed and be better. Sometimes I always think why women, particularly why women believe in any God. Why should they worship any God?
ولی الان بالفرض الان مسئله شریعه مطرح شده. پارسال من و مینای احدی رو اتحادیه اروپا از طرف یه سری اعضابش دعوت کرده بودن که راجع به شریعه بحث کنن. من میخوام بگم چرا الان مطرح شده.
But we're talking about Sharia now. Sharia has become an issue now. Last year, Mina Hadi and I were invited to European Union. We were talking about Sharia. I want to say why this has become an issue.
طالبان و خود آمریکا برای به قول معروف آلترناتیو مقابل شوروی سابق به وجود آورد و خمینی رو برای جلوگیری از سکولاریسم توی ایران درست کرد رو اون کنفرانس گوادلوپ و به هر حال به این صورت این پدیده به وجود اومد.
This phenomenon of political Islam was actually created by the Western, by like American government. They actually helped the Taliban against the Soviet Union. They helped Khomeini to go to power. The Guadalajara deal was something that was done in Western society.
زنها توی افغانستان سنگسار میشدن، البته تو ایرانم، و بدترین رفتار با اونا میشد. تو قفس‌های متحرک راه میرفتن، ولی مدیای اینجا، مطبوعات اینجا اینو منعکس نمی‌کرد تا زمانی که دوربینای آمریکایی روشونو به اون ور کردن.
Women were stoned in Afghanistan and also in Iran. They were forced to move around in mobile prisons, which is the hijab and all this burqa and all that. And they were treated that way for many years, and nobody, no international media paid any attention until the American government and American cameras turned around and went the other way.
این زمانم زمانی به وجود اومد بعد از 11 سپتامبر، بعد از برای ترس از تروریسم و شورش‌هایی که تو گدوهای مختلف تو کشورهای مختلف صورت گرفت و دستاوردهای منفی که به خاطر این سازش‌های دول غربی و اسلام سیاسی صورت گرفت، اینا این مسئله رو مطرح کردن.
And it happened after the 11th September 11 when the political Islam became such an obvious power, and when the Western countries were afraid of the uprising of ghettos, and they wanted to make compromises with Islamic groups.
هنوزم کسی زیاد از اعدام بچه‌ها تو ایران صحبت نمی‌کنه، از سنگسار زنان تو ایران صحبت نمی‌کنه، از زنان که این همه مورد توحش قرار می‌گیرن صحبت نمی‌کنه. ولی الان اون ترس پیاده شدن قوانین شریعه است که من فکر می‌کنم بیشتر به خاطر اون منافعی هستش که این دول غربی دارن، نه به خاطر دفاع از حقوق جهان شمول انسان هست.
And nobody's still talking about the execution of children, execution of children, stoning of women, and many of the things that are still happening in Iran and other countries. And the reason that some of them are at the moment paying more attention is because of the Western countries, Western governments, that they want some of the issues to be raised.
در واقع نمیخوان که اسلام سیاسی رو شکست بدن، بلکه میخوان جنبه‌های ضد آمریکایی بودنش رو از بین ببرن و اونو مطیع خودش کنن. ولی راه حلی که ما اینجا پیشنهاد میکنیم اینه که نباید سازش کرد، نباید باج داد به این اسلام سیاسی و باید از سکولاریسم دفاع کرد و از حقوق جهان شمول انسان ها.
They actually are not very interested in finishing with this political Islam. They're just trying to make it more friendly towards the Western policies, international policies. And we saying that we shouldn't have any compromise against political Islam. We should make no compromises with them.
Okay. Yeah. A response from Ibn, Warraq, and then from Roy, perhaps on either of the questions that you want, and then we'll take 3 or 4 more comments and then have a summary from the members of the panel.
Yes, this is a very quick reply to the question whether Islam and democracy are compatible. It's really very useful, I find, when talking about Islam to distinguish between what I call Islam's 1, 2, and 3. Islam 1 is what's in the Quran and what the Prophet is supposed to have said. Islam 2 is the hadith, the traditions, and that theological construct that we call Islam as developed by the Islamic theologians. And Islam 3 is Islamic civilization, what Muslims actually did do as opposed to what they should have done. So it's quite clear that Islam 1 and 2 are totally and utterly incompatible with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But that does not mean that in history, in Islamic history, we had a series of relentless theocracies. There is good evidence to show that the situation varied from ruler to ruler, and sometimes some sort of religious justification was given for post facto, but it depended very much on the temperament of the ruler. And in recent years, right up to the 1930s, for example, Islam 3, Islamic civilization, was far more tolerant than Islam's 1 and 2 of behavior which was condemned in Europe, for example, homosexuality. Well, Islam's 1 and 2 quite clearly condemn homosexuality, but Islamic civilization right up to the 1930s was certainly far more tolerant. But it's quite clear that the recent human rights declarations, the Islamic human rights declarations, they are both the ones, the two more better known ones, the ones one released in 1981, the Universal Islamic Declaration, begins with a quote from the Quran. This is a declaration for mankind, a guidance and instruction to those who fear God. And then the Cairo Declaration also says, first line, keenly aware of the place of mankind in Islam as vice-regent of Allah on earth. So these are quite clearly based on Islamic theology, whereas the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights was entirely secular. So the recent human rights declarations coming from Islamic countries are, again, totally incompatible with democracy. Coming back to very quickly on the issue of multiculturalism, I was a teacher in a primary school in London for 5 years in the 1970s. And this was the heyday of multiculturalism in the school. I was with the Inner London Education Authority. And multiculturalism, I always feel, is like cholesterol. It comes in 2 forms, good and bad. The thinking behind multiculturalism in those days was that we had a lot of children from various backgrounds, from families who were recent immigrants from the Indian subcontinent, and that we thought that they would fare better, they would perform better in the classes if we did not denigrate the culture of their homes, that we did not show contempt for their own culture, and that we should try to reflect it and try and learn from it and enrich the lives of all the other children with their culture. But of course, little did we realize that we were pigeonholing them. We were throwing these children back. Instead of helping them to integrate, we were in a sense pushing them back into a cultural ghetto. But the original intent was certainly not that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Roy.
Thank you. There are 5 points I want to touch on very, very quickly in response to these questions. First of all, we cannot and we must not leave Europe's Muslims to their fate. We cannot accept multiculturalism, which for them is a misnomer. It's monoculturalism. Some of our strongest allies against political Islam are and will be Muslims. 3 weeks ago at the UN in Geneva, we organised a conference on freedom of expression and religion in the Human Rights Council. And 2 of the 4 speakers were Muslims. And just to give you a couple of quotes, the most vociferous proponents of political Islam within the UN system are the Organisation of the Islamic Conference. This is a group which speaks for all 57 Islamic states in the UN. That organisation takes a very, very hard line, very authoritarian line. It will not accept any criticism of Islam or mention of Islam whatsoever. One of our Muslim speakers said, the OIC does not speak for Muslims. We do not accept, we totally reject what they are saying on our behalf. We must support people who are saying that. We must not say because they're Muslims, they're on the other side. Ex-Muslims have a small problem of credibility in the Muslim community. We cannot destroy Islam. There is no way Islam is going to disappear. What our target must be is to push Islamism, political Islam, back from the public arena, back to the private sphere. That must be our objective, and both ex-Muslims and Muslims can join together in that objective. Second point was on Sharia courts. Well, of course, under the UK Arbitration Act, as I understand, they are legally binding. Once the 2 sides have decided, have accepted the arbitration of that court, then the UK court system will support and will endorse the findings of that court. The problem is, of course, that women who live in a Muslim community are not really free to choose whether they have arbitration or not. When we had the campaign against Sharia law in Ontario, one of the strongest arguments was that if you're a woman living in a Muslim community and the imams say, because you are a Muslim, you must accept the Sharia court because to deny that is apostasy, then what choice do they have? So we must fight the Sharia courts on the basis that they deny one of our basic principles of our democracy, our basic values of equality of men and women. We should not fight them because they're Islamic or Jewish or Hindu or any other kind of court. We should fight them because they deny access to the full benefits of our laws. I think that is a platform which we can use against Sharia courts in the future. Somebody asked about Holocaust denial and Durban 2. I was at a conference again in Geneva last Thursday and Friday. It was organised by the High Commission for Human Rights at the request of the Islamic States, and it was to discuss limits to freedom of expression. And in that debate, which lasted for 2 days, Pakistan argued that why should there be laws in Europe against Holocaust denial, and people are in prison for Holocaust denial in Europe, when they are completely free to insult the Prophet? Well, that's quite a good question. Unfortunately, they then went on to say not that laws against Holocaust denial should be swept away, but they said, quote, we have the perfect model here for laws against defamation of Islam, the Prophet, and religious symbols. So they are using our Holocaust denial laws as a model in which to introduce Islamic restrictions on our freedoms. And finally, Durban 2, the Durban Review Conference will be held in Geneva in April next year. Unfortunately, there have been 2 or 3 decisions. Durban 1, which was held in Durban in 2001, came up with some pretty horrific outcomes. There was a whole series of resolutions. It became a kind of jamboree to demonize Israel, America, and essentially Western values. Now, a decision has been made by the Human Rights Council that none of the resolutions passed, none of the decisions made by Durban 1 can be changed. They cannot be discussed again. What the review conference is for is to look at progress in the implementation of those resolutions. And it has been suggested that we can come up with new measures to help further those resolutions. For example, restrictions on freedom of expression. Now, freedom of expression is our strongest weapon in the fight against political Islam. We have to distinguish between criticism, valid factual criticism, and incitement to violence. But political Islam and the OIC is trying to shut down freedom of expression on the grounds that any criticism of Islam is equivalent to incitement of hatred against Muslims. We must make it clear that there is a distinction. You've all heard of this hideous phrase, Islamophobia. Islamophobia was coined by Ayatollah Khomeini in the early 80s. It has been a brilliant success in shutting down any criticism of Islam by equating it with racism and incitement to hatred of Muslims. It avoids the necessity of dealing with the real issues. It silences critics. It demonizes even Muslim critics of Islam or Islamism. It equates an intellectual objection with racism, and it's inaccurate. A phobia is an irrational fear. So accusing anyone of Islamophobia is to treat them dismissively as being mentally ill. We should reject the concept of Islamophobia totally as part of our weapons to support freedom of expression.
My name's Jabida. I'm an ex-Muslim and a filmmaker, and it's really great to be here, and I'm really enjoying myself because I feel like I'm amongst my tribe, as it were. But I do want to
You need to hold the microphone a little bit closer.
Sorry. I mean, it's great to be here because I feel like I'm amongst my tribe, but I do want to go away from here with more than just a feel-good factor. I feel so far that we're preaching to the converted, really. As a filmmaker, my question to you, perhaps to Johann, but because you're in the media, but to others too, is these great discussions that we're having today, really we need to be having with mainstream society and with believers, because we want to spread our ideas, we want to change society, and how do we do that? The example that I have is a film that I'm making at the moment that's been nearly finished for months because I'm not really allowed to say what I want. I'm making a film, it's about the hijab. I make a statement in it about isn't it better for men to learn how to function appropriately in the presence of women than to hide women from them? And then I go on to say, well, that's easy for me to say, and I'm in a privileged position. I live in the West. I live in a country where I'm not harassed and abused because I'm walking around unveiled. The commissioner, the TV channel that commissioned that, told me that was inflammatory, and she found it very insulting, and she doesn't want to put words in my mouth, but I can't say that. So my question is, do we, as filmmakers and journalists, etc., what do I do in this situation? Do I water down what I want to say and get some of these views that we're talking about on TV and into the mainstream? Or do I say, no, that's my position, that's what I want to say, and risk not being able to get any voice, any of our kinds of opinions out there at all?
Lady just there in the middle. There. Yeah.
Hi, and I want to go back to the Arbitration Act and how we get Sharia out of that system. Now, it seems to me that if you say just ban Sharia law, that's going to have no political will behind it. Now, what I think could be done, and probably fairly easily, although you'd have to ask a parliamentary draftsman, is to amend the legislation so that that process is not open to any system of rules which is discriminatory by way of sex, race, religion, sexual orientation. Now, I think that that would get more backing because it's fairly uncontroversial to say that those sorts of discrimination are bad. And our friends down in the Houses of Parliament would agree with that. I mean, I have written to my MP and sent a copy to Baroness Scotland and Dominic Grieve, who's the Shadow Attorney General. I haven't heard anything, but that, I think, is perhaps a simple way of getting that Sharia out of the Arbitration Act system that may, if enough people press for it, get some political will behind it.
Thanks. Yeah, over here. And then we're very short on time, but we'll get all the questions who've now got their hands up in. No, the guy here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Gerard Batten. I'm a member of the European Parliament for London for the UK Independence Party. And I've been writing and commenting on this issue now for the last few years since I took up my seat. I think a lot of our awareness of the Islamic religion was fueled by the 9/11 events. And I think that President Bush made a big mistake, amongst many, when he coined the phrase a war on terror. It's not a war on terror, it's a struggle with ideology. And unless we understand that, then we're not going to get anywhere. And can I say how wonderful it is to be here today and listen to these arguments and back to be encouraged by so many intelligent people saying the right things. The biggest problem is a political problem in actual fact, because it's the vast amounts of money that are coming from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan to fuel fundamentalist, literalist and extremist Islam in the UK. The Wahhabists, I believe half of the mosques in the UK now are funded, and the imams are funded by money from these fundamentalist countries which are exporting their own problem to us. And there has to be a political solution to that. The flow of money has to be stopped. Can I say, as on the ideological struggle front, in an ideological struggle, the first thing you mustn't do is conduct your argument on your opponent's terms. We constantly talk about Islam, which of course is surrender, to submission to the will of Allah. Every other religion, we talk about the founder, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, the religion of the Jews. Why don't we start talking about Islam, as we used to in this country 40 or 50 years ago, as Mohammedanism, which is what it actually is.
Okay. This guy here on the edge of the balcony. And then people here will have 2 minutes for summaries.
Jeff Webb, Bedfordshire Humanist Group. I'm particularly taken by Maryam's idea of legally challenging Sharia courts. Could you say exactly how that legal challenge would take place? What kind of case we would take up and how? And also, when are you going to start the legal fighting fund so we can all assist it? Because that would be fantastic.
Okay. We have only now a few minutes left, and only really time in which for am I right, for the panel to finish. Just let's run very quick, almost a minute, but you're last, so you can spill over, Maryam. But Roy first.
Okay. One of the reasons why Islamism, political Islam, is being successful in Europe and in this country as well, is because it is awash with Saudi money. They have spent literally billions promoting their hardline Islamism around the world. And what they are using that money to do is to create an environment where they're persuading Muslims that they are being discriminated against, yet they have complete freedom of religion in Europe. They are persuading them that they are supreme. Islam is the one true religion. They are identifying Western civilization with decadence, and they're urging its replacement with an Islamic state. And the grander the schemes that they come up with, the better. I don't believe that the Muslims of West Ham need a £600 million mosque. A mosque that will dominate the Olympic site in 2012, nor could they even afford 1/50th of the cost. The more grandiose the scheme, the better. And it has one simple purpose: to show the world's TV cameras in 2012 that in Britain, we are the masters now. They must not succeed.
Oh, sorry,
You're going to be last. We're going to move back to say, Yes, just very quick. 30 seconds each.
چرا اسلامیا قویان؟ البته این یک سوال درستی نیست.
Why the Islamists have become powerful? I don't think this is a good question.
ما میدونیم که تعداد بسیار زیادی توی دنیا به اسلام معتقدن.
We know that there are many people in the world that they believe in Islam.
ولی اینجا ما از اسلام سیاسی صحبت میکنیم و اسلام سیاسی با موفقیتش تو ایران جنبش بسیار قوی شد و تونست خودش رو از اون مرزهای خودش فراتر بذاره و در سطح دنیا مهم بشه.
But we're talking about political Islam, and political Islam, by coming to power Islam in Iran, managed to get over the borders and become a global power.
صحبت از شریعه شد و پلتفرمشون و غیره، ولی به طور کلی چرا الان سازش میشه؟ یکی به خاطر ترس از تروریسته.
We're talking about Sharia and Islamic laws, but why they're making compromises with this? One is, I think, because of the fear of terrorism.
یکی دیگه به خاطر منافع اقتصادیشونه.
And the second is because of the economical benefit that governments have.
یکی دیگه ترس از سکولاریسم بین جامعه مهاجرینه و کشورهایی که اسلام به قول معروف اسلام زده شدن.
And also the fear of secularism among people who have come to these countries and also in their own countries.
اینجا تا ما صحبت میکنیم منتقد میشیم و میخوایم دفاع از حقوق جان شمول انسان‌ها بکنیم، به ما میگن اسلاموفوبیست یا به یه قشر دیگه راسیست میگن.
When we start talking about human rights, about people's rights, they tell us that we are Islamophobists and against Islam.
کاری که ما میتونیم میکنیم، فکر میکنم ماها و شماها، اینه که با این نسبیت فرهنگی که آپارتاید اجتماعی رو به وجود میاره در وهله اول مبارزه کنیم.
One thing we can do, especially you people who are sitting here, you can do is fight against relativism, cultural relativism, and also that is bringing about social discrimination.
و نکته دیگه که من خلاصش میکنم، باید از جنبش‌هایی، از حرکت‌هایی مثل اکس مسلم دفاع کرد. بدون شما این حرکت‌ها موفق نمیشه و اگر این اسلام سیاسی فتواهای مختلفی میده، اکس مسلم، جنبش اکس مسلم آنتی فتواها هست و باید از جانب مردم آزادیخواه و سکولار و معتقد به حقوق برابر دفاع بشه که بتونه موفق بشه و این منافعش شامل حال همه میشه، نه فقط انسانایی که اسلام میزنن.
To make it very short, I want to ask you people, you secular people who are here, I want to ask you to defend people like ex-Muslim, people, organizations like ex-Muslim. If we want to fight against this, and if we are to be victorious in this, we have to unite, and you have to support ex-Muslim and organizations like that.
Ibn Warraq, your final thought?
Yes, no. We really need to get back some self-confidence in our own civilization, in our own values. I think there is plenty to be proud of. Those values that we call Western originated in the West, and I think the values enshrined in the Human Rights Declaration of 1948 are best exemplified at the moment in the West. But I do believe that they are universal, and after all, some of these values were adumbrated by people like Cyrus the Great 500 BC. So I really think we need to get back to a common core curriculum where we are not afraid to assert the positive achievements like the thread, which I call the golden thread running through Western civilization, that's rationalism, which led us to freedom of expression and science, the great achievements of science. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is real and growing prejudice against Muslims. And when we are criticising the bigotry within Islam, we should also criticise the bigotry against Muslims. And actually there's no contradiction between the two. The BBC did an experiment. They sent out equal CVs, equivalent CVs, half of them with Muslims' names, half of them with non-Muslim names. The Muslim names were 50% less likely to get an interview. There is real prejudice. People as mainstream as Martin Amis can moot massive human rights abuses against Muslims. So I think there is a very limited application for the use of the word Islamophobia, and it is very widely abused. There are some people who believe that Islam is a uniquely evil religion, that it is worse than Christianity or Judaism in their literalist forms. I don't believe that. I think it's as bad, it's no better, but I think we should bear that in mind. The woman who asked, can't we allow Sharia courts but then ban discrimination against gender, and so what would be the point of it then? We've got courts that do that. They're called British courts. The last thing about Saudi Arabia, I think it's really important this is brought up, and I think it comes back to, it actually answers something that Ihsan was saying in an earlier panel. The Saudi government is funding the most disgusting base Islamism all over the world. Anywhere I go in the world, when I want to find a jihadi mosque, I go there and there's a plaque saying donation from the House of Saud. And it's very important, we are paying for that. Every time you fill up your car, you're paying for that. So when Ihsan says the government of America and the government of Britain are our allies in the fights against Sharia law, they literally hold hands with the House of Saud, which enforces an even more extreme form of Sharia law than Iran. We're talking about a regime that enforces the gender apartheid of not letting women drive. So what we mustn't do when we're articulating the need for opposing jihadism is to project our good intentions onto the British and American governments, which will approach countries on the basis of trying to monopolise resources and all sorts of factors that they're perfectly happy to cut deals with the most disgusting Sharia enforcing regime in the world. So we should not forget that.
Just a couple of points. I'm sorry, I do feel I need to talk about some of the points that were raised. There was mention of, ex-Muslims trying to destroy Islam. Obviously, I don't think anybody thinks that they're doing that or wants to do that. I think, and that's not the case. I think what we're saying is that, people shouldn't be killed for renouncing religion and leaving religion. And because it is punishable by death in Islamic states, an organization like the Council of Ex-Muslims is crucial. We do have many Muslims who support us. We need a lot more. And I think Fariborz had mentioned in the earlier panel, well, you should be asking the question to those who support the killing of apostates, rather than, saying that ex-Muslims are doing something that are not being very useful. I think it is actually important to break the taboo. That's how things change throughout history, and I think we need to understand the importance of this movement. But again, what I want to stress is that the Council of Ex-Muslims is not creating another identity. We don't even agree with the Muslim identity, or the Sunni identity, or Shia identity, or various ethnic or nationality sorts of identities. A lot of these are constructed. They're used to divide and segregate people. What about citizenship? What about humanity as an identity and as the only identity that should matter to us? And I think one of the things that we're stressing is exactly that. It's not up to ex-Muslims and Muslims to deal with this. No, it's a problem for everybody. Political Islam affects everybody because it affects their lives, it affects their rights, it affects their freedom, it affects people living in London, and it affects people living in Tehran and living in Kabul. And so in that sense, it's something we all need to work together on. But I do think, it's not enough to just say you're opposed to Sharia. There are a lot of groups that I would not stand near and walk and even stand with a 10-foot pole between us, because they're racist, they're anti-immigrant, they're anti-Muslim, and they use their criticism of Islam. Suddenly, they're so pro-women's rights. They're against abortion laws in the U.S. They're against any sort of preventative, sexual AIDS, contraceptive sexual AIDS. Oh, yeah, they're against that as well. That was a Freudian slip, anyway. So they're against single mothers. They're against welfare, blah 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 blah. And suddenly now they're so pro women's rights in the Middle East, and they have pictures of women being stoned and female, genitally mutilated all over, and they've suddenly become the new feminists. Nonsense. They're just as inhuman. I think actually political Islam and U.S. militarism are two sides of one coin. And I think, Mahin mentioned the fact that, about how Western government policy helped in the rise of political Islam. And I think that they do need each other. They do feed off each other. And in a sense, I think, if we're going to look to Western governments for help and alliances, you're looking in the wrong place, because history has changed because of vast social movements, progressive movements, left movements, working class movements, and the power actually to change the situation, to end Sharia law, is right here in this room. It's out on the streets. And And I think we should take them to court. I don't know how, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure we can do it because it's just common sense. I think we should, there are a lot of things we should do, but don't be mistaken that the only way we're going to stop it is by becoming a powerful force and uniting. And I think we have the success of Canada. People say, well, we've already got Sharia courts here. We didn't have them in Canada. Well, imagine if slaves sat down and said, oh, we've got slavery now, so what are we going to do? Well, let's try to work within the framework we already have. We already have racial apartheid, so let's just try to work within this framework. I'm sorry. Our job, the job of people that change things, is to look beyond what we have and to say that's not enough. We live in the 21st century and people deserve to live lives worthy of the 21st century, and we won't compromise. And talking about the fact, well, let's fight Sharia courts on the basis of discrimination. I mean, how many times have religious groups in this country avoided rights issues based on asking for exemptions from discrimination? And what about secularism? What about citizenship rights? What about people being equal before the law and not, relegating? The state has a duty to treat people as equal citizens and not hand over its duties to backward, regressive, parasitical imams, tribal leaders, religious leaders. I'm sorry, and I think we need to hold our standards up because those standards are what changes the world, and those demands, and I think we do need to be very firm in those. Finally, I just want to say that let's try to keep this momentum. Let's try to get a resolution passed here that we're opposed to Sharia law. Let's try to take them to court, sit with the NSS, the BHA, and everybody else that's been on the panels. Let's see what we can do. March 7th, we've already reserved this room for a meeting on the Sharia law in this country. Let's see how far we've progressed on March 8th. And let's start thinking about organizing a mass demonstration in Trafalgar Square against Sharia. Let's aim for March, International Women's Day, what could be more appropriate, and let's start organizing. We'll get police permission right away. Let's start organizing and get that silent majority that is opposed to Sharia law. But let's be clear. You're opposed to Sharia law not because you're a bleeding racist. Do they say bleeding racist? Not because those are bleeding liberals. Right? Not because you're a racist. Not because you're anti-immigration. Don't come. I'm sorry, don't come. Because you have to choose your allies in this fight. You're against Sharia because you're pro-secularism, because you're pro-humanism, because you're pro-people's rights, because you're pro-citizenship rights, because you want people to be treated as human beings in this century. Then you're welcome, and I bet you a vast majority of people feel that way too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maryam, and thank you to all our panel. As I say, I'm Andrew Copson from the British Humanist Association, which is the national charity supporting and representing non-religious people, promoting humanism, and in our campaigning work, working for a secular state and an open society. Please do visit our stall over there at the back too to copy Casper's plug of this morning. Let's give again a round of applause to our excellent speakers. And then afterwards, Maryam would like us to show our hands in favour of this resolution. Let's do that first, actually, then we can applaud ourselves at the same time. I've got the wording I've got here is that the conference calls on the UK and European governments to bring an end to the use and implementation of Sharia law, discriminatory against women and children in particular, and to guarantee unconditional equal citizenship rights for all. Anyone against that? Passed by acclamation, and let's show our acclamation of our panel as well at the same time.
That was great. Thank you very much. I think that's going to build the momentum for a lot of work to come. When Guild Builders from Holland, I think, made a film, Threatner, a lot of people got upset. And Reza Moradi was one of them. And he was really offended by that movie, 10 Minutes. And he was he was just went crazy. So this is a sort of anti-immigrant film. And he didn't actually decide to go and petrol bomb people. He went home and remade Fitna with the same scenes but different, reflecting different reality. We'll watch that for 10 minutes. And then we'll have a break. We'll come back, we'll hear Richard Dawkins.
Fitna is a 2008 short film by right-wing Dutch parliamentarian Geert Wilders. It does not represent the truth. In fact, it represents Eurocentric racist views about people labelled or deemed Muslim. What follows is an edited version of Fitna with my commentary about the realities of Islam and political Islam. It is an attempt to disgrace political Islam and its apologists and side with the masses of people resisting it in the Middle East.
وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُم مَّا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِّبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ تُرْهِبُونَ بِهِ عَدُوَّ اللَّهِ وَعَدُوَّكُمْ وَآخَرِينَ مِن دُونِهِمْ
Second, please. I'm going to die, aren't I? No. Say I'm going to die. Ma'am, say your prayers. And we're not going to think positive because you got to help each other get off the floor. Now, stay calm. You're doing a good job, ma'am. You're doing a good job. It's so hot. I'm burning. Oye, estoy en alta con una bomba en el tren y hemos tenido...
والمشركين أعداءك أعداء الدين اللهم احصهم عددا وقتلهم بددا ولا تغادر منهم أحدا.
Unfortunately, people in the West have not been witness to the slaughter of an entire generation in the Middle East and North Africa. They have not seen the stoning of Maryam Ayubi on their TV screens, the hanging of Sweet 16 Atifa Rajabi for acts against chastity, the acid thrown on women's faces for improper veilings, the torture of labour and student activists and political opponents, the beheadings and the mass graves.
الذين كفروا بآياتنا سوف نصليهم نارا كلما نضجت جلودهم بدلناهم جلودا غيرها ليذوقوا العذاب إن الله كان عزيزا حكيما. لو أذن الله لنا يا أمة محمد سيقول حتى الحجر يا مسلم هذا يهودي خلفي تعال وقعته ونحن نقطعها والله لا نقطعها أيها اليهود. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الجهاد في سبيل الله الجهاد في سبيل الله.
The biggest victims, and for several decades, have been those deemed or labelled Muslims by Geert Wilders. Western governments' only concern about this movement is that it has moved out of its sphere of influence. Otherwise, it was their policy that brought it to centre stage during the Cold War. It was their solution to a left-leaning revolution in Iran.
فاليهود هم اليهود هؤلاء هم الذين يجب أن يذبحوا.
فإذا لقيتم الذين كفروا فضرب الرقاب حتى إذا أثخنتموهم فشدوا
ضد المحتل ويقدم بيوت ويقدم شباب ويقدم تضرب رقاب وتنسف جماجم. هذا فضل النصر والشهاده القوميه.
The threats faced by people at the forefront of resisting this movement in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan and elsewhere are not headline news. Instead, the killers are heads of states who are warmly welcomed into the UN, the ILO, and given the red carpet treatment by Western governments.
اسلام دینی است که دنیا رو میخواد اداره کنه و اداره کرده و بالاخره اداره خواهد کرد.
پیام انقلاب پیام جهانی است، در جغرافیا و زمان محدود نمی شود. تردید نکنید که انشاءالله اسلام همه کجا رو فتح خواهد کرد؟ همه قله های جهان رو فتح.
You will take over USA. You will take over UK. You will take over Europe. You will defeat them all. You will get victory. You will take over Egypt. We trust in Allah.
Political Islam in Iran is being brought to its knees by a vast social movement. Today this movement leads a battle of enlightenment against Islam in power. Its victory depends on the solidarity of people everywhere with the people's movement in Iran against both poles of international terrorism, US-led and Islamic terrorism. The rise of Islam in power in Europe is opening the way for religion's detrimental role in society and the diminishing of secularism. Labeling masses of people as Muslims is an attempt to make them one and the same with the political Islamic movement. In reality, a large majority of these so-called Muslims are victims, survivors, and opponents of the political Islamic movement. They must be granted asylum, protection, and treated as equal citizens. Appeasing the political Islamic movement, cultural relativism, and labelling and ghettoising masses of people only serves to hand them over to reactionary Islamic organisations and parasitical imams, and is a prescription for increased discrimination and violence in society, such as honour killings. This has been the reality for people in the Middle East for 3 decades now. It can only be stopped, not by bombing Iran and Iraq, but by showing real solidarity with the resisting people in the region, by defending universal rights, by defending secularism and demanding an end to religion's role in society at large.